So just couple o geiriau bach amdano'r Ynni Cymunedol, beth mae'n dweud I fi. Fi'n credu tri pethau yn bwysig. Ymgysylltu i'r bobl, achos ni moyn cyrraedd zero carbon, mae mor bwysig ni'n cysylltu gyda bobl Cymru. So fe'n just wneud pethau technegol, adeiladu ffermydd wynt. Mae rhaid I ni newid y ffordd ni'n byw I cyrraedd zero carbon. So dyma'r bwysig, un peth bwysig. Hefyd, Ynni Cymunedol, mae'n dweud, mae'n amdano'r datblygiad asedau, asset development, enghreifftiau fel Ynni Ogwen yn y Gogledd Cymru, sy'n wedi wneud yr twrbyn dŵr Ynni Adnewyddol. A wedyn, maen nhw'n defnyddio'r elw I wneud lot o pethau fel banciau bwyd yn y gymuned, a hefyd wedi datblygu prosiect wych gyda'r ceir trydan yn yr ardal gwledig fyna. Ac hefyd, jyst I cadw'r arian yn Cymru, fi'n o'r hanes fy hunan, lot o'r teulu fi, maen nhw wedi bod yn gweithio dan y ddeiar yn y pwch glo. A'r arian o'r glo wedi mynd mas o'r Cymru. A jyst mae'n bwysig, os ni moyn datblygu Ynni Cymunedol, I trio I cadw arian cymaint yn y bosib yn Cymru. A'r grwpiau sydd wedi wneud y prosiectau, maen nhw'n heb elw, maen nhw'n defnyddio surplus I cadw yn yr cymuned. Maen nhw'n elusen neu'r cwmni cydweithredol neu cooperatives. A dros Mhryden I gyd, mae'n sector eitha mawr, dros 200 megawatts o'r ynni. Mae hwn yn dweud ambyti 3 miliwn o bunnau o'r asedau yn y gymuned, so mae'n eitha mawr. A mae'n ambyti 300 o'r grwpiau dros Mhryden sy'n wedi datblygu prosiectau eitha mawr. A'r just un peth i'r ymgeiswyr, os chi moyn yr pleidlais ni, just gwrando nawr, cos fi'n mynd I dweud beth mae Ynni Cymunedol Cymru yn moyn. Tri o pethau, un peth yw'r I cefnogi y sector Ynni Cymunedol. Hefyd, I weld pethau ni'n gallu werthu trydan ni i'r bobl Cymru. Ni'n gwybod mae hwn yn anodd, ond ni'n weld lot mwy o hwn yn digwydd yn Ewrop. Mae pethau yn digwydd yn Cymru yn cyffrous fel Ynni Ogwen yn y Gogledd yn gweithio gyda Energy Local, a hefyd Gower Power yn gweithio gyda Ecotricity I werthu trydan yn direct o'r paneli solar nhw. Ond yn Belgium fel enghraifft, Eco Power, mae dros 15,000 o'r customers nhw, a maen nhw'n turbynau wynt, a maen werthu trydan iddyn nhw direct. A fi'n teimlo mae'n just bwysig I wneud ymgysylltu'r bobl I wneud link y trydan a'r defnyddio. And y Senedd Cymru yn gweithio I hwn I wneud trafod pethau fel hwn gyda'r Ofgem a'r Llywodraeth Rhyden. A hefyd, ni moyn yr cronfa her, y Challenge Fund, I cefnogi Ynni Cymunedol yn Cymru. Dyma digon o ddiwrth fi. Ni moyn newid nawr i'r ymgeiswyr. Os fi'n gallu dechrau just ar y sgrin gyda Llyr, dim ond 2 funud I siarad am yr position Plaid Cymru amdan o'r Ynni Cymunedol newid hinsawdd a'r Ynni Adnewyddol. I chi, Llyr.
Iawn, diolch yn fawr iawn Dan, a diolch am y cyfle I fod yn rhan o'r cyfarfod yma heno. Ni'n teimlo bron iawn bod Dan yn darllen manifesto Plaid Cymru wrth ddweud y sylwadau agoriadol yna, ond mi fydden ni'n dweud hynny, ond bydden ni, ond felly gen I gyfle I brofi hynny dros yr awr nesaf yma. Dwi'n lefarydd wrth gwrs I Blaid Cymru ar yr amgylchedd y materion gwledig sydd yn cynnwys y portffolio ynni ac wedi dal y rôl honno am nifer o flynyddoedd erbyn hyn. Dwi hefyd yn cadeirio'r grŵp o plaid ar ynni cynaladwy yn y Senedd, a dwi'n gweld rhai o'r enwau sydd yma heddiw yn rai sydd wedi mynychu rhai o'r cyfarfodydd rheini, felly mae'n dda bod pawb gyda'i gilydd eto. Cyfan o'n eisiau dweud falle I ddechrau, achos dwi'n siŵr ewn I fewn I fanylion penodol yn ystod y drafodaeth nes ymlaen, yw bod mae bwyslais cryf ar gryfhau cymunedau, wrth gwrs yn treiddio trwy manifesto Plaid Cymru a thrwy rhaglen lywodraethu Plaid Cymru. A mae'r sylfaeni neu'r sail sydd yna i y manifesto hwn, wrth gwrs, yn adlewyrchu, dwi'n meddwl, rhai o'r unweddau Ynni Cymunedol, hynny yw, ni'n sôn am, we're looking at community empowerment is one of the fundamental sort of bases of the Plaid Cymru manifesto, and you touched on asset development earlier. We are, in fact, proposing a Community Rights Act as a party, which would give local communities the right to buy assets, including land, so that we can start empowering those communities. And of course, it's more than just energy, isn't it? It's building capacity, it's building social infrastructure through social enterprise. And I spent 20 years of my career before being elected working in social enterprise across Wales. So, we know the added value that brings to our communities. We're also focused in our manifesto on developing a new localism. It's about producing locally, selling locally. Now, people would think of that maybe in relation to food, just as relevant in relation to energy. Again, reflecting some of what Dan has said earlier in terms of shortening the supply chains and being able to generate and sell locally, which is something that we feel quite strongly about. And it's plugging those holes in the economic bucket. The local economy is leaking too much money out of the local economy, and we need to plug as many of those holes as we can. And of course, the other key theme, which is a central feature of our manifesto, is tackling the climate emergency. And carbon emissions being reduced, and renewable energy has a huge role to play. And we have an ambition for net zero by 2035, not 2050, as is currently the case, of course. So, our policies reflect much of what you're trying to achieve. And there's huge potential, but if we can unlock the potential of community energy, we're unlocking much more than just energy.
Okay, diolch Llŷr. Ga I newid i Helen Westhead o'r Liberal Democrats?
It's Helen Westhead of the Greens. Is that me?
Oh, sorry, Helen. Yes, sorry, Helen Westhead of the Green Party.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
So, Helen, if you could give a two-minute introduction to the Green Party's policies.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. The climate and nature emergencies, of course, sit at the heart of Wales Green Party policy. Our manifesto details action needed to address the climate and nature crisis whilst tackling structural inequality. And we're the only party who can credibly say that that's the foundation of our ethos and integrated across our manifesto. And Wales Green Party is committed to prioritising community-scale renewable energy projects. Is fundamental to our green vision of net zero by 2030. And the flooding experience last year in South Wales valleys and beyond brings the climate crisis home. Community energy provides hope for communities, empowering local people in solutions to the issues that affect them most. Our Green Transformation Fund for Wales sets out the pathway for community energy, not based on arbitrary targets, but actually delivering funding at scale. It creates tens of thousands of new green jobs across the sector. And I'm inspired by the organisations represented here today, many of whom I've worked with in my 15-year career in renewable energy, that despite having quite a challenging time over the last decade or so, their organisations are embracing new opportunities, including the electrification of transport and low carbon heat. Community energy has become much more than efficiency, solar PV and wind, although these will still be key. We know that decarbonising heat is really challenging, so the green transformation includes renewable heat, district heat networks, and embracing the hydrogen economy. And I see this as a really exciting future for community energy. Now is the time to embrace storage projects and electric vehicle charging, as some people on this call are doing. Wales Green Party is committed to making the necessary upgrades to the electricity grid whilst embracing smart energy to get these types of projects connected. We know how to ask the right questions, scrutinise decision-making and form alliances to deliver real change. And we know this because elected Greens are doing this in every part of the UK, and now it's time for Wales. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks Helen, and apologies, I got the party mixed up. You can tell I'm not a politician. Can I introduce Catrin Maby from the Labour Party, please?
Hi, yeah, I'm Catrin Maby. I'm actually the Labour candidate for the Monmouth constituency, and I bring apologies from Leslie Griffiths, who was double booked for tonight, and it's not any lack of interest in community energy from her. So I started my working life as an engineer in refrigeration and air conditioning, but I moved into working on energy efficiency and housing because of fuel poverty, and set up an energy advice service for council tenants originally. So I spent about 30 years working on sustainable energy and fuel poverty. But my first experience of community renewables was when I visited a town in Austria about 20 years ago, where the community had come together to establish a biomass heating system. And what really struck me then was the amount of work done in the early stages to raise awareness and get the interest of residents. It took a really dedicated team of community activists to do this. It took a long time, so I'm really aware of the amount of work involved, which is social as well as technical and legal work. That same town went on to co-invest in a community wind turbine and then a second one, and they ran a competition to choose names for them. They came up with Adam and Eve because it was the birth of a new era. So I thought that was very nice. Community energy makes such sense in so many ways. Energy touches all of our lives every day, at home, at work, at play. It's crucially important in that it puts communities at the heart of the energy transition, keeps the financial benefits local, as well as developing local skills and jobs. And it makes the connection for people between the energy they use and how it's generated and supplied, which is so important as part of generating sustainable behaviour. So Welsh Labour position, sorry, I took a little time to come on to that. The climate and environmental emergency is not the next global crisis, it's now, and it's urgent. Labour is committed to action to tackle it and to supporting a green recovery. In government, Welsh Labour have already set new stretching targets towards net zero and taken meaningful action across government to help get there. Welsh Labour is committed to our entire energy system being net zero by 2035 at the latest. We've reached the milestone of generating more than 50% of the energy we consume in Wales from renewables, up from 19% in 2014. There are now no coal-fired power stations operating in Wales. We banned fracking and put a moratorium on new waste incinerators. So the manifesto sets out proposals to move Wales forward, including developing a new tidal lagoon challenge as part of a world-leading marine energy industry, including tidal stream and wave. That's obviously at large scale, but we want more of the energy infrastructure of Wales to be in our own hands, owned by Welsh communities, co-ops and public bodies. And Welsh Labour government wants to use all of its powers to bring about a mosaic of public, local and community-owned clean energy to displace a reliance on fossil fuels and retain that financial benefit of energy production for Welsh communities. That will create long-term jobs in Wales, especially in those parts of the country where such employment has been in short supply. So the policy of Welsh government Welsh Labour government requires that from 2020, all new energy projects in Wales must include an element of local ownership, retaining more wealth in Wales and creating real community benefit. We've got a target to reach 1 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity in local ownership by 2030. And that has been surpassed, the halfway mark, was surpassed in 2018 with 540 megawatts of locally owned renewable energy generation capacity. So I know these are fine words, the devil's in the detail, and there are lots of issues faced by the sector, including capital finance, legal agreements, public procurement practice is a big issue, planning. Have I got any more time? Have I run out?
No, I think that's great.
Sorry.
No, but that's brilliant. You gave a really good introduction to yourself and the Labour Party. Brilliant.
Thanks.
Gai newid I Cadan ap Tomos for the Liberal Democrats.
Diolch yn fawr, the real McCoy. I'll forgive you for your mix-up earlier. But it's great to be here. I'm really pleased to be here on a personal level, actually, because I've admired from afar the work that Community Energy Wales has been doing over the past however long it is that you've been in existence, and I've got a bit of a sort of a burning personal passion for community energy. So I'm the candidate for our party in Cadeiriwyd, so I'm very much approaching these things from a rural perspective and the ability that community energy can have to strengthen communities in rural areas in particular. So as a party in this election, we're all about putting recovery first for our health, for our economy and for our planet too. I think, you know, if anything good is to come out of the pandemic and the year and a bit that we've all had to struggle through, I think it should be sort of a rethinking and a resetting perhaps of the way that we do things in every walk of life. And it's no better opportunity, I think, for us to long overdue start addressing the climate emergency, as everyone else has said, is rapidly encroaching, and it is going to be the biggest challenge that we face over the next few decades. So it's clear that we're not doing enough. So that's why we as Welsh Lib Dems have put forward an ambitious and challenging plan that would see us step up to the plate to protect our planet for future generations. I say future generations, my generation is probably going to be the one that starts having to deal with a lot of these challenges that are ahead of us. So we're pledging to spend £1 billion a year on addressing the climate emergency. It's a big sum, it's a record-breaking sum actually for government expenditure in Wales that will help us meet those obligations. And so that's everything from creating warmer green homes, cutting fuel bills, creating green energy, new green jobs, technology right across Wales, and protecting our natural environment too. So that's going to be a mix of private investment, but also repurposing existing government spending to make sure that we're squeezing as much as we can out of what Welsh Government is doing to be addressing those issues. And we need to make sure that the recovery that we build is one for all of Wales, and renewables and green energy is clearly a part of that. So we're envisaging stuff like, you know, making Holyhead a regional hub for renewable energy and producing hydrogen, making Port Talbot a manufacturing and port hub for floating offshore wind, and making sure that those you know, regional opportunities are being enriched, and that we're building expertise in different parts of Wales to create high quality jobs. There's a huge potential for renewables right across Wales, and obviously we need cleaner energy. With you know, the demand on our energy grid is set to be doubling by 2050. So there's a real need to act urgently, and all sorts of solutions as part of that. So there's the big projects, which are clearly needed, particularly in terms of what is one of the few ways that we're going to be able to you know, invest what's needed into bringing our grid up to scratch to make sure that we can enable the smaller community level projects. But those community owned projects absolutely have a crucial part to play in the solution to a lot of these problems. And we want to make sure that we're empowering communities and making sure that communities can take ownership over the energy that's been developed and generated in their areas. So we want to pass a Community Empowerment Act. I know it's something that Community Energy Wales have been talking about. It's similar to the similar act that was passed in Scotland in 2015 to make sure not only can communities do all those sorts of things like buying their assets, they can help design how their communities look and feel, supporting community organisations like Generation, but making sure that those profits are being kept in and felt by the communities that they're situated in as well. And finally, making sure that everyone, as well as that the community ownership, that people feel part of the conversation as we move forward and develop these solutions. So we're really keen to see a series of climate citizens citizens assemblies right across Wales to make sure that we're building and creating these solutions together in tandem with people in our communities too.
Right, diolch Cadan. Gai newid I Adrian Robson o'r the Conservative Party.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for the invitation to the Hustings tonight. It's a very important issue, one which is of great interest to me. In terms of Conservative Party policy, you may have seen our manifesto, which was launched yesterday, and so there's some key initiatives in that area which I hope will be of interest. One is to set up a £150 million Marine Investment Energy Fund to purchase equity in viable and executing marine energy projects and small-scale hydro initiatives. We have policies around numbers of jobs, 65,000 across Wales, of which we would hope to get 15,000 green jobs in that sector. We would introduce an energy efficiency voucher scheme for households to cover the costs of improvement. So that would help particularly some of the fuel poverty households in those areas of local authorities that have those areas of fuel poverty, perhaps help rural areas as well. And so that would be a step forward to enable them to get improvement costs on their energy. And it's all very well having great policies, but you haven't got something to back up and hold politicians and other public bodies to make them accountable, then it's not much use. So we would establish the Office of Environmental Protection and Climate Change, so that these sorts of policies, when we look at climate change initiatives and environmental initiatives, are backed up by action as well. We would introduce a Clean Air Act, and our net zero carbon emission target is 2050, and we ban single-use plastics for not apart from, of course, in medicine, and deliver a deposit return scheme. So some interesting environmental and energy policies there. In terms of my background, a little bit wider, I mean, I've chosen at the start, I'm standing for South Wales Central on the regional list, but I'm also a councillor in Cardiff, and have seen where Cardiff, particularly as a council, mostly cross-party to be honest, has embraced a lot of the energy initiatives and ideas that have come forward. So for example, cross-party, we quite happily agreed the climate emergency. We have some schemes coming through which will be interesting in terms of the a heat network, which will power and heat rather houses in a new nearby development near to the incinerator, plus hopefully the indoor arena if that happens. And a lot of these initiatives and ideas which are there are good for the environment, good for the city, good for Wales more widely. So I hope that's not much longer than 2 minutes, and that's a brief flavour of myself and some of the policies that you'll see in our manifesto.
Okay, diolch yn fawr, Adrian. Really interesting. So un cwestiwn oddi wrth Grants Paisley, mae'n dweud, mae wedi bod sort of obsesiwn am fewn dysoddi inward investment yn Cymru, ond yr arian mynd mas tu fas o'r Cymru. So, ych chi'n gael eich pleidleisio fel aelod Senedd, siwr wyt ti'n gallu cadw mwy o arian yn Cymru yn y prosiectau Ynni Cymunedol, ac hefyd beth fydd y manylion, siwr i mynd i checo mae hwn yn digwydd sort of mewn practice. So I'll just go randomly round to Helen Westhead or the Green Party.
Yeah, thank you. That is a fantastic question. How do we retain that investment and those benefits within Wales? So Wales Green Party has set out a Green Transformation Fund and details some measures of how this works. Essentially, it's about issuing bonds, Welsh bonds, and getting return from that through Welsh PPAs, which very much shows public sector leadership, and it keeps the control within Wales and keeps the benefit within Wales, as well as creating those jobs and the secondary benefits for communities. So that's just the financial mechanism. And we're also releasing a lot more detail on this actually this week. It's based on the Green New Deal model, which has tried and tested economic principle that's been around globally since the 1930s. And it's designed to deliver economic prosperity at a time like this in post-COVID recovery, for example, obviously, but that wasn't envisaged. But it's ideal for a time like this where we really need to invest in our communities, and we need to invest in measures that would enhance social equality and really put forward a green recovery in a fair and equitable way. So that green recovery not only involves financial growth, but social and environmental gain as well. And that's the fundamentals of the
Helen,
Green New Deal.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I'll just interrupt you there, but just want to switch to Catrin to give her view on should he cadw arian and Cymru, how to keep more wealth from these projects in Wales.
Thanks. So yeah, that's a useful contribution from Helen about the investment side of it. I think you were also thinking about who gets the work, perhaps, and I think there's that double side of it, both the way that you offer shares and making sure there's priority for local people who are doing a share ownership, for example. But on the other side, I think there's a big issue in terms of public procurement practice. And certainly in both energy efficiency and in renewable energy supply, there can be a problem where procurement practice is geared a little bit to the larger companies, as well as to being potentially outside of Wales. And I think that's something we've got to be extremely careful about. And sometimes actually, certainly that creates a catastrophe, because you get some large companies basically trying to get as much of the market as possible, and then cherry picking where they put their effort in. So there's a lot of important reasons to really tighten up the procurement side, and that's something that local authorities and Welsh Government need to work on together.
Okay,
thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Catrin. Can mynd i Llyr?
Wel, un o'r pethau allweddol sydd ganddo ni yn y polisi ynni, wrth gwrs, yw I greu Ynni Cymru. We're going to create an entity called Ynni Cymru, Energy Wales. It's going to be an energy project development company, which will follow the model of Transport for Wales, or the Development Bank for Wales, if you like. But it'll be charged with unlocking much of the potential that we have in Wales. So that means working closely with, for example, community projects, with the public sector, with the private sector as well. Now, initially, of course, it'll be about conducting that audit of capabilities that we have in Wales, and the assessment of project opportunities within, community energy and other sectors, bringing its expertise and its resources then to the table, providing low interest loans, helping to attract investment as well, brokering joint ventures, holding its own equity in some projects, and that, of course, will hopefully generate then a revenue stream eventually as well. And all of that sort of money would then be reinvested into growing the sector further. So hopefully that will help stimulate some of the circulation of the money within the local economy.
Okay, diolch Llyr. Ac Adrian?
Thank you, and an interesting question. It's obvious that when community energy schemes are set up, then the community needs to be involved and see tangible benefits to those schemes, both in terms of obviously the energy saving aspect of it, but in terms of finance, because if they can't finance some of the schemes, then definitely you find that obviously it causes problems and the schemes may not be successful. It does require some intervention from government and local authorities as well to back them, but at the end of the day, the community have to have that key stake in it. I have to be honest, I've slightly forgotten the original question down on that after seeing some of the other answers. So apologies if that hasn't quite answered it, and please do remind me of what it was.
Just to keep, just how, ways of retaining the money within Wales, and how you might try and police, sort of not police it, but monitor it.
Whatever arrangements you have set up, as I said in my opening comments, you do need some sort of police, as you say, Dan, I suppose probably the best way. And the office that we would look to establish of environment protection and climate change is the sort of thing that I would envisage would start to look at these community energy schemes and make sure that the money was going to the right places. So if that meant if the agreement was that the money stays in Wales, then that's the sort of body that you need there to ensure that it's policed, to make sure it doesn't go places it shouldn't.
Great. Okay, Cadan.
So I think a lot of it is about making sure that we use our public money for public good, and that we're investing it in the right places. So we want to, we're open to a lot of ideas, but stuff like making sure that we're using public pension funds to bring a benefit in terms of these sorts of projects. So at the moment, Welsh councils invest about over £700 million of their pension funds in fossil fuels, which is as a proportion higher than any other nation in the UK. And there's an investment potential there within Welsh pension funds of about £13 billion. Now, obviously, it's not all going to go into community energy and energy projects, but if we can bring all of those public sector pension pots together and establish an investment fund with them, a public investment fund, we can use that then to kickstart projects like this, making sure that we're putting that money into community-owned, community-run projects, using government bonds to help kickstart some of those projects that are shovel-ready. And as a result, then you can then bring a benefit back to those councils, those public sector organisations through their pension funds that can then help keep that money recycling, and you can build up the fund and use that to spur on a properly green Welsh recovery. There are lots of other models, but I think that's the one that we're quite excited about.
Thanks, Cadan. Just a couple of observations on those answers, really interesting answers, just to sort of reflect back to you. Obviously, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And when you're talking about setting up a kind of new organisation, whatever, to deliver, Welsh-based energy, sort of look at what our sector's already done. So Community Energy Wales has already set up Ynni Cymunedol, which has developed a 900 kilowatt wind turbine in Carmarthenshire, and is currently looking at a 30 megawatt ground mount solar scheme up in Wrexham, the largest ground mount solar scheme in the UK. So I personally feel it'd be really good to try and work with the existing structures which have got a track record of raising share offer money or bonds to develop sort of well-shown community assets. Catrin's spot on about procurement. That's a big issue. Just one example of a really positive experience was Egni Co-op working with Newport Council and Swansea Council. I think Egni's now got 4.3 megawatts of rooftop solar on schools and community buildings and businesses across Wales. So it's actually the biggest rooftop solar co-op in the UK. But that was really a partnership between Newport Council and Swansea Council and the co-op. We were bringing in external funds, which fitted into their low carbon agenda. And it was just a brilliant partnership, which went far beyond just a kind of commercial contractual relationship that they might have had with a large developer. And it's still developing. It's really interesting. And I think so that the point that Cadan was making at the end there was also. So Cadan, would you just remind me what the final point that you're making was again? Sorry.
About pension funds and making
yes,
sure that
exactly. I know the Future Generations Commission is extremely concerned by that. We've seen several parties have got that in their manifesto, disinvestment from fossil fuels, and we would like to see all parties really adopt that and put some, because again, why aren't those councils investing in some of our co-ops with those funds, because they are locally owned anyway. Okay, I'd like to go on to one of the questions actually from the floor. Dave Palmer, I saw, which was how candidates could see community energy schemes linking up with housing schemes in Wales. Can you see any linkages there with some of the new housing developments that we've got from, I guess, from housing associations, also developers? If I could start this time with Adrian.
Thank you, Dan. And that is absolutely key. Partnership is the success, will be the success of community energy, I believe, in Wales. Because if you don't have the partnership with the new housing developments, and as I said before, I'm based in Cardiff, where we've seen an awful lot of new housing on the northwest of the city, the northeast, then you're just not, you're missing the opportunities there, because you build new houses, they're built to standard. Developers, let's be honest, will go to the basic standard that they can get away with, and if the partnership isn't set up quickly and early with new developments, then and those conversations aren't had, then you miss those opportunities to install whatever community energy infrastructure you feel is appropriate, be it solar panel, be it other arrangements. So absolutely, it's all about partnership to get them into those houses. And with new houses, we have to do it. It has happened a little bit in some places, but there's so much more that we could do. I drive through the St Fagans and Craiger parts of Cardiff that were the countryside until not so long ago, and the new houses. It's a new housing development. It's new communities being formed, and you do wonder what discussions were actually had by council, by Welsh government, to actually encourage developers to start getting into community energy. I think there's been a few missed opportunities, and there are opportunities we can't afford to miss for the future.
Yeah, okay. Cadan, have you got ideas on that?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely vital that we're using our housing stock, as power stations effectively. I think the huge potential that we have on our rooftops, in the ground for heat source pumps is absolutely crucial. And I think as we move towards that, part of the £1 billion investment that I talked about at the beginning is to make sure that we are greening our homes, and that's through a mixture of insulation and but also renewable energy. And I think there's the real role to play for community-owned initiatives to be part of that, and to use some of that investment that we're putting into not only retrofitting existing homes, but also making sure that the new homes that we develop are green homes too. Making sure that the local companies, locally owned cooperatives are part of those supply chains. They're encouraged to and helped to bid for some of those contracts to put that work into practice is absolutely vital, and it's a big part of what we want to see in terms of our approach to making sure that homes are greener going forwards.
Okay, now with Helen.
Yeah, thank you. There's actually some great examples of community-led housing embracing the likes of PV, ground source heat pumps that Cadan was talking about. But we also think in greens in terms of long-term spatial planning as well. It's like, are these communities in the right place for sustainability and transport? Do they have the strategic infrastructure available in place to support the electrification of transport and potentially heat? And what about hydrogen as well? So we think it's really important to take a step back, support community-led housing to lead on this, and be really part of the proposal that Greens have to build 12,000 new homes per year to the highest energy efficiency and environmental standards.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Catrin.
Right, so I was interpreting the question perhaps more practically, and thinking a new housing development and how you would make sure that that program worked together, that you had a scheme where the whole scheme was net zero, and I think that's quite interesting that there's a new program called the Smart Living program that Welsh Government have been running, which is test new ways of managing power, heat, transport and smart technology at a small scale. And I think that that's an important aspect of that. You could look at a discrete housing group. I mean, thinking about some of the examples, if you had a group heating scheme, hopefully we'll be building to not need heating at all. But if you did have a group heating scheme, then obviously you can have that under common ownership. And there are different ways that you can charge tariffs and perhaps keep some of the profit if there is any within the program. Similarly, you might have installations which are on site rather than each building, if they're PV, for example, or a nearby wind generator. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you could arrange that. But it's a good idea, definitely, if you can create that discrete grouping.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks,
good question.
Catrin. Yeah, Llafur.
Yeah, diolch yn fawr. Well, one of the first things that we want to do is charge the National Infrastructure Commission in Wales with the task of working with the Future Generations Commissioner, the Development Bank for Wales and local authorities to turn what would have been its State of the Nation report, which is due to be published next month, into a schedule of infrastructure projects that need to be delivered as part of the the green economic stimulus that we're looking to put forward. Now that would include building homes, and it includes renewable energy. So clearly, they need to be sort of joined up and go hand in hand. And we're committed to banning fossil fuels from all new homes next year, which is going to create, I hope, that sort of culture change in terms of the way that we look at heating and energy in our homes. I visited Freiburg a few years ago, where you have housing estates that are totally self-contained in terms of energy. Well, we know about the energy positive houses that we can have. So the question really is, how can we ensure that housing is developed, but developed within the community ownership model? And I could wax lyrical about our housing policy here, but that is a big feature of our housing policy. So yeah.
That's great, Llafur. And just a couple o enghreifftiau o'r housing yw'r down to earth in Abertawe. Maen nhw'n gweithio gyda social housing provider. Ac hefyd prosiect Skyline, efallai chi'n wedi clywed amdano fe, yn y rond y Canon Taf, a maen nhw'n gobeithio gael y tir oddi wrth NRW i datblygu tai cymunedol ar y mynydd yn yr ardal fyna. Yn defnyddio model o'r beth sy'n wedi gael ei digwydd yn yr Alban gyda'r land transfer schemes fyna. So mae lot o pethau da yn digwydd. Another question from Martin. What policies do the parties have on greening the heating, in particular of existing stock? And I think that's a really good question. It's a difficult question, which brings in other issues like the strength of the grid, and the kind of retrofitting renewable heat isn't always straightforward. But I'd just like to pass that back now to our candidates. Cadan, can I start with you?
Yes, absolutely. So in my day job, I work for an organisation called Care and Repair Cymru that helps older people live independently in their homes. We've just started a new project which is helping older people out of fuel poverty, and a big part of that is trying to make sure that they're taking advantage of greener technologies to reduce their heating bills. And I think that's a really good blueprint to be following. But I think one of the things that we're coming up against is a lot of the support that's on offer for government at the moment, through stuff like the Nest scheme to be replacing old boilers, etc., or some of the other schemes that are on offer. They're quite patchy in terms of, particularly for people in rural areas who are perhaps on much older forms of heating their homes. Like my grandparents, for example, they're still running off a coal-fired Rayburn, for example. There's no government support there on offer to move to a greener technology for heating their homes, because it's assumed that they'd already made that transition. And I think particularly in rural mid Wales, there is quite a surprising number of people who are still using those sorts of means of heating their homes. So I think we need to make sure that any support that is on offer, as part of I've already talked about the investment in retrofitting and making sure that we have greener homes. We need to make sure that is an inclusive offer, to make sure that those sorts of people aren't falling through the nets and aren't, who want to do the right thing, but they're not given the support that they need from government to make that often costly switch to a greener solution for their heating at home.
Okay, Llafur.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're committed to creating a long-term energy efficiency infrastructure plan so that we can retrofit, the entire Welsh housing stock actually over the next 30 years. And that will contribute, as has been suggested, to ending fuel poverty and tackling, excess deaths in winter as well. Now, it is highly ambitious, but of course we know we have some of the poorest housing stock in Western Europe, so it's something that needs to be achieved. And we know as well that, not only will it achieve the environmental sort of carbon reduction that we want to see, but there'll be an economic boost in terms of the jobs created to retrofit all of those homes, and the social win as well in, as I said, tackling fuel poverty and health benefits too, reduction of sort of respiratory problems. And I think the Future Generations Commissioner estimated around £150 million saving for the NHS from that kind of sort of investment, and this is a saving every year. But heating by electricity and heat pumps, is going to be one of our priorities. And every home in Wales will be offered a free energy audit, and that will give recommendations on a conversion plan. And we will be providing finance as well to try and meet some of that cost.
Okay, Catrin, just reflecting on Llafur there, I guess he's talking about sort of external wall insulation, heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps. Have you got any views on that, especially in sort of off-gas areas?
Yeah. Essentially, I mean, the ideal approach is a holistic one: energy efficiency first, and then any residual heat demand. We're looking at electrified approach using heat pumps and making sure that the grid is electrified. So that is generally considered now to be the best way forward. How to achieve it is another matter. I would say that one way not to achieve it is to follow the Green Homes Grant programme that's just run in England, which I've followed very closely. And I really hope that's not what the Tory manifesto is suggesting, because anything you do, any kind of a scheme that you support this, it needs to be really carefully planned to be long-term with clear exit strategies and practical implementation plans for installers and homeowners. You need really clear and consistent information and guidance. You need a holistic whole house scope so that the full range of measures are identified and prioritized. Not every house is the same. We've got to be really careful about quality. We've got to have effective and transparent quality control and clear steps and customer journey to get the work done, and really quick and efficient payment schedules with realistic pricing and flexibility to cover different situations. So it's not one size fits all with these sorts of support programs. I mean, I have a quote from research I was doing myself from a heat pump installer in reference to the Green Homes grant that has not lasted even a whole year in England, to say it's a shame that government often fails to understand that with grant programs that are attractive to consumers, then industry cannot operate outside of it because the consumers demand the grant. But if it's poorly managed, industry also can't operate inside of the scheme either. So there's huge damage to industry and its confidence. And what we've actually seen was companies close because of the Green Homes grant. So everything, it has to be very well planned. I'm sorry, it's such a long answer. Again, such a big question. And I think the optimised retrofit programme that Welsh Labour have started, I know it seems slow and arduous, but I think it is the right way to do it, because we don't want to repeat previous mistakes. We want to get the system right and then roll it out across all the 1.4 million homes in Wales.
Okay, Helen, what are your ideas on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I find it strange that we're hearing from parties in power talking about energy efficiency when I feel like we've been here before. Energy efficiency is the obvious measure to improve the sustainability of our homes and reduce fuel bills. Yet it comes up time and time again, and I've lost count of the number of times various initiatives are on and off the table. And as a homeowner, you need to be really on the ball to understand what you're eligible for at any one time. And this must be particularly difficult for older people to engage in. And it's only going to get more complicated, because if we're going to be truly sustainable around energy, we need to embrace smart heating, time of use tariffs, electrification, and perhaps hydrogen in the long term. So let's get some consistency, some clarity, help lift people out of fuel poverty. And actually, part of another question is, it is not just fuel poverty. We need to look at wider structural measures as well that are putting people in this position in the first place.
Okay, Adrian, can I turn to you?
Thank you. And I agree with Helen's point about how actually the system can be very confusing for elderly people, because there's so much change in the whole system that it's spelling it out and making it very clear is not easy, and that's something that I would like to see clarify. Whatever options are out there need to be made available and made clear for them to access. And bearing in mind that, you know, as well as obviously houses in fuel poverty, there are many households and houses, particularly amongst the elderly, who are, you know, they find themselves in a position where they're asset rich and cash poor, and therefore for them to be able to access and suddenly upgrade their, for example, their heating system, as the questioner asked, is not always easy. So our proposal to introduce energy efficiency vouchers, I think, will go some way towards really trying to green the heating arrangements out there, particularly on the current stock, and particularly in areas where there's fuel poverty. If you may, I'd like to just give a personal example of my in-laws, and just to show how difficult this can be to have not to have the conversations, but to make it understandable. About 8 years ago, the house where my in-laws lived in was still running on night storage heaters, which, as you know, are not particularly energy efficient and cost an absolute fortune, especially if they're not set correctly. And my wife and I were pushing heavily for them to invest and get central heating. And it took a lot of persuasion for them. It was a change. It wasn't the fact that they realised the bills might come down, that the efficiency was stronger. It was change, and to overcome that took a lot of doing. I mean, at the time, my father-in-law was 92, and he was going to bed in a room that had no heating because the night storage heaters weren't working in the right times. We got there eventually, but it took a lot of persuading. And if my experience is just one individual case, then for those who are involved in this, they really have their work cut out of some people, because they understandably it's so complex that it has to be made clear to those who need it and to the older housing stock that needs upgrading.
Okay, diolch Adrian. Just i pwynt o mas un o'r prosiectau wych yn Lloegr o'r Manchester Carbon Co-op. A maen nhw'n wneud lot o gwaith gyda householders I roi cyngor I nhw, should I wneud any energy efficiency a wneud heat pumps, etc. Maen nhw'n gael lot mwy o trust oddi wrth yr householders achos maen nhw'n heb elw. Bobl ddim yn sort of roi trust i'r cwmnïau mawr fel yr sort of big six. Maen nhw'n moyn gweithio gyda cydweithfa with cooperatives. Fi'n credu, licen ni weld lot mwy o hon yn Cymru, not just a kind of national energy efficiency plan, but a strategy I gweithio gyda grwpiau cymunedol yn cymunedol yn y sector hyn. There's been quite a lot of discussion in the chat around pension funds and how they use their money. And I've been in a meeting actually with Sophie Howe, the Future Generations Commissioner, talking to some of the pension funds in Wales and some of their advisors who were sort of, you could just tell, incredibly well paid guys from London, talking about sort of risk and stuff like that. But at the same time, we've seen our sectors being very successful. As I said, across the UK, £300 million of investment. I just wanted to ask the candidates what your views are of pension funds in Wales, and can you see ways that they might be more engaged in, community energy, civil society, to put that money into the Welsh economy rather than into fossil fuel investments? Can I start with Llyr?
Yeah, well, we would absolutely want to see that shift happening. It's something that we've long sort of called for, and personally on a Senedd level, it's something that I called for in the Senedd as well. I mean, we are the Development Bank for Wales is one entity that we want to sort of develop or to be able to act more fully as a bank. But we need Treasury permission for that to happen, and we want to ask for that permission because we want them to be able to borrow from sources such as pension funds, so that they can lend to public and community and private sectors to try and unlock some of the potential that we have.
Yeah, that's great. I just wanted to pass to the other candidates just because we haven't got a lot of time now before 7. Catrin.
Yeah, just very briefly then, I think it's essential that we do develop these different sources of finance for the simple reason that actually the work that we need to do on, even if you're looking at homes, is way beyond what you can get your money back in a short time for. We've gone past a return on private investment as being the incentive, and this is really about the common good. This is about global warming. This is about actually something that is an urgent crisis. So we can no longer just rely on, oh, we get your money back. It's a way to make a quick buck. So absolutely, we have to find every way of financing this work.
Okay, Helen.
Yeah, my perspective here is as an environmentalist who then went to business school, it's like finance and environment is two completely different languages. It feels like that we just need to bring these worlds together. And actually, the talk is more now about clean, renewable investment, and that's being forced by announcements such as made yesterday on the UK government's commitment to upping its climate change commitments. So it's going to happen, but the financial sector is going to need support to get up to speed, and we're going to need to work together and talk the same language.
Brilliant. Cadan.
Yeah, well, I brought this up earlier in an earlier answer, but so just to clarify that we want to merge all of the public sector pensions in Wales and use that then to establish an investment fund, which would be directed by Welsh Government, and making sure that we have a target percentage of all of those investments from that fund to be invested in climate projects. And I think community energy absolutely needs to play a big part in those investments. Brilliant.
And Adrian.
Thank you. It is about risk where those investors advise, and no doubt many local authorities and public bodies agree and follow that advice to put their money into various pension funds. And it's about the risk. It's showing that the risk of community energy schemes is minimal. And certainly in some instances actually a safer bet than sometimes the volatility of fossil fuels. It's about demonstrating it. Others have talked about the differences of languages. They are two completely different worlds, and it needs both to sort of move a bit to come together in the middle, so that they're talking at least the same language, so then they make decisions based on the same sort of information and coming at it from similar viewpoints, so that they can then make decisions to decide where to invest the money.
Okay, can I just ask the candidates to give us sort of a very brief summing up of their position, perhaps thinking back on the manifesto points that I mentioned at the beginning of kind of support to the sector, a challenge fund, and also local sale of electricity. But obviously any other points you want to make are great, but please be brief. Llyr.
Yeah, well, we are committed to a challenge fund for communities, towns and cities in Wales, and we want them to be communities to be carbon pioneers in terms of reducing carbon emissions, and renewables is a big part of that. We will implement a Communities Rights Act, which I mentioned earlier, and that means actually a moratorium on the sale of any public assets to the private sector unless the local community have the first bite of the cherry, or that there are strong covenants on those as well. And the peer-to-peer trading stuff, we really do need to build on the work that's already happening. And our public procurement policy as well would ramp up the need to source energy locally.
Okay, Catrin. Catrin, you're on mute.
Sorry, forgot right at the last hurdle I fell. Our manifesto makes clear promises that will help create a greener, more equal, more prosperous Wales. Our new greener economy will be grounded in the values of progressive change, values of cooperation and competition, not competition, looking out for one another, not divided against one another, and harnessing the natural strengths of Wales and its environment. So developing a more sustainable relationship with the natural world must begin in our local communities. Access to local green spaces for the well-being benefits it can bring, a local economy that avoids waste, locally generated renewable energy, locally grown food, keeping all communities safe from the impact of pollution and the changing climate. I know I'm going beyond the core issue here, but I think we have to think in a joined up way. The next Welsh Labour government will create secure and lasting jobs as we decarbonise our economy. We'll support Welsh business.
Catrin, I'll just need to switch to Helen now, just
okay.
running into time.
I'll keep it brief. Essentially, community energy, in our view, is essential to our plans for decarbonisation to deliver net zero by 2030 and make this a priority. Have a look at our green energy transformation for Wales, which details this in much further detail. But now is the time for Welsh community organisations to be heard, and it's essential that communities feel empowered to act on climate. So we get this as Greens, providing Greens in the Senedd will provide that voice for communities to be heard.
Okay, thank you. And Cadan.
Yeah, well, we've heard a lot tonight. I think a lot of us are on the same page, a lot of these things. But for us as Welsh Liberal Democrats, we're clear that as we look to prioritise our recovery, there can't be any recovery without it being a green one. And we want to make sure that we're working hand in hand with communities, the private sector and public sector, making sure that we're all working together to unlock the investment that we need, and that is properly owned, properly led by our communities right across Wales, and that communities reap the benefits. And community energy, I think, is a real signifier of how we can do that right, and absolutely is part of what we see our plans in the future in terms of our energy mix.
And Adrian.
Thank you. I mean, there are various aspects which we would do. First of all, can I just say, actually, I found this very useful tonight. Very interesting, and a great debate to hear some of the questions and points from Community Energy Wales has been really eye-opening for me, so thank you for that. But in terms of our policies, and where we are then, I've outlined some at the start of the meeting, but I would also say that we would encourage the development of a specialist centre at the university for energy and also transportation as well, and the two are actually interlinked as we move forward quite strongly, and that would hopefully help support the community energy sector with some ways of funding it in terms of, some new ideas as well. So generate and produce innovation. I would like to see, local markets for energy. I see no issue with that at all. If you produce the energy and you're doing it privately, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be the ones to make profit from it. We go back to the discussion we had earlier about, obviously government assistance on that, but if a collective comes together and is able to make some profit out of it, then it actually might attract some of those investors that we've just been talking about in the previous question. So there's a whole host of policies there we've got in our manifesto, and I hope that you'll take a look at the relevant pages as well and find things in there that you'll like to see. And please don't hesitate to question myself or any of our candidates on what's in the manifesto. It's there ahead of the election for the next 2 weeks.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank all the candidates. I think they've been really good, extremely well informed, and clearly done the research beforehand tonight. Fi'n mwyn rhoi falch iddyn nhw gyd. Just a couple of brief reflections in terms of it's about values. If we want to tackle climate change, it's about behaviour change. Most importantly, it's not about profit or making money. We need to try and take people with us on this journey to try and tackle climate change as soon as possible. And the main inspiration that I get actually is from working in schools where we've got solar panels, and just the excitement of people like seeing the panels there, how much they generate, what other measures they could take. It's really encouraging to see younger people engaging with that, engaging with things like Extinction Rebellion. And I do remember like one school group I took up to see our wind turbines above Pontardawe, and one of the young men, and this would be a real nightmare for planners, turned to me and said, "Look, Dan, every hill should have one." So on that note, positive note about how easy it should be to develop wind turbines in Wales, and obviously other forms of renewable energy. I'd like to thank all the candidates again. We can stay on the call if people do want to stay on the call for a little bit longer. But of course, I know the other candidates have got other obligations, so they may need to drop off now. But diolch yn fawr. Thank you for coming.